Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food in whatever space you have available. And I do this by sharing exactly what's been going on in my own allotment, my own kitchen garden here in Littlehampton on the south coast of the United Kingdom. I've been growing my own for over 30 years, but I still learn something new every single day. Now, coming up this week, we have got our book review of the month, which has been Charles Dowding No Dig book. And because this is the first episode in March, can you believe it? We're in March. We have our seed of the month. But before that, let's head down to the allotment. Well, we start off this week down on the allotment, as you can probably hear with the traffic going past. Really annoying, the noise of this traffic these days. Anyway, I've headed down the allotment. Now, the weather this week, of course, you know I've been talking a lot about how wet it has been on the allotment lately. Well, how wet it has been in general lately. Well, we've had a few dry days, which has meant the soil has started to dry out here on the allotment, which is rather pleasing for me. It means it's less claggy, it's easier to work. It means that also it should start warming up, which is the main thing that I've been looking at this week here on the allotment. Now, because we have had a few dry days during the week, I did suggest to my work that we consider changing the weekends to the dry days. I mean, then I'm sure everyone would agree. I think that is a good plan and be more productive. That way we're only working really on the wet days. Who's with me on that? Anyway, here on the allotment, so I came down here with a view that there's not much we can really do still, in part because I'm starting a lot of my seeds off at home. But one of the key things we need to know is when is the soil going to be suitable for planting out our seeds? And this is easily done with a soil thermometer. Now, I got a soil thermometer from garden centres and Amazon. They're not that expensive, but they are a very useful tool to have. And all you simply do, like any thermometer, you stick it in the soil and it tells you the temperature of the soil. Now, why does the temperature matter so much? Well, it's quite simple, really. The temperature matters because that is what tells the seeds to germinate. It encourages the seeds to start to grow. So telling the temperature of the soil is a very, very important part of what we do. Now, the ideal temperature does vary from seed to seed, but I like to see temperatures of above 10 degrees Celsius. For me, that feels like a very good, sturdy temperature. Now, of course, temperatures do fluctuate throughout the day. They get cold at night and things like that. So it's not an exact science for the amateur gardener, but it gives you a good idea of what is going on. Now, when I've been taking my measurements today, what I've seen is my soils are 5-7 degrees this morning, so a little bit on the cold side still. What I decided I was going to do this week, however, is start to warm my soils up. And this is very, very easily done with just some very, very simple tools. I spoke of this last week where I mentioned that I potted out my cloches on the beds at home. And that's one of the things that we can really do here on the allotment. Now, I like to put the cloches out a couple of weeks before I plan to sow any seeds. That way it just warms the soil up during the day, catches in that sun and makes that soil a little bit warmer so we can come along, sow our seeds such as carrots, parsnips, things like that, directly into the soil and encourage them to grow. Well, that's not the only thing that we can do. It's a very good thing, don't get me wrong, because those cloches will encourage the seeds to germinate and they will also help look after those plants as they grow. But there is more things that we can do. One of the very easiest things to do is to get some black plastic, some weed suppressant membrane, something like that, and place that over the soil. That black will attract the sun, suppress weeds at the same time, but it will attract that sun and it will warm up the soil at the same time. Now this is only really appropriate in beds where I have nothing growing here on the allotment, and I've got a couple of beds where that is applicable. It does of course reduce the amount of weeds, which is a good thing as well, but as you know, we are moving more that we don't really want to use plastic in the garden, but it does have uses. I know some people will use some damp proof membrane that's used in building, and that's meant to last for quite a few years as a good alternative to weed suppressing membrane. For me, the biggest trouble with weed suppressor membrane is it does fray. And yes, you can burn holes into it if you want to plant through it, but it does fray. One of my neighbours had it on their allotment a few years ago, and in the strong winds it got blown up, caught around my gooseberry bushes, and for years my gooseberries had these little black threads that were really, really tricky to get out of the gooseberry bush. But it's certainly something that we could do should we need to. The trouble with, of course, this method is that you have to remove the membrane in order to plant anything through. You could sow seeds and place the membrane back across, but as soon as they germinate, you've got to remove the membrane at the same time. It's something we could do to warm the soils up, of course. It is certainly something we could do, but it's not something that I like to do unless absolutely necessary. For me, I much rather use our cloches because they work so much better. Well, I have accomplished a lot on the allotment here today. I've got to say, I am looking around my allotment and thinking that it really is starting to come together really quite nicely. Everywhere is prepared for the growing season. I feel like we're on top of a lot of the problem areas. I just want some really good dry days, warmer days, so that we can really get everything growing. But back at home, we are doing lots of seed sowing, and I'm going to head on home now and I'm going to talk to you about our seed of the month. While I head home, why don't we find out what's been going on in the Supporters Club this week? Well, it is that point of the podcast where I ask if you would be good enough to rate and review this podcast. It only takes you a few seconds, but it helps us get found by more people who might also be interested in learning more about how to grow their own food. But not only that, if you are enjoying this podcast, you want to help support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. For just £5 a month, you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcasts that give you more of an idea what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. But also, once a month through the letterbox, you will receive our monthly seed pack. And that seed pack contains a collection of seeds that I've carefully chosen to be sown in that very month. So they're not hanging around for months on end waiting to be sown. Included with the seeds, you also get a copy of our mini newspaper, which gives you a few ideas of things that you can do throughout the month. It also gives you instructions on how to sow those seeds. I've also turned it into more of a tool that you could use to keep your allotment, your kitchen garden organised and productive. And all it costs is just £5 a month. Now, as an example, we have sown some Brussels sprout seeds as part of the club. Brussels sprouts, of course, that Christmas favourite, but a great winter vegetable that we need to sow now. And that is included within February's seed pack. But we're moving on to March, so more seeds are coming out for this month. So once again, if that is something you would be interested in, then please head to theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk. Right, let's get back to the gardening. Well, I'm back home now and I am in my potting shed out in the garden, and I'm out here because it is time, of course, to sow our seed of the month. The first episode of the month, we include a seed of the month. But before that, I just want to mention something. So this week the temperature has been considerably warmer and consistent in here. The average temperature over this last week in this shed has been 11 degrees Celsius. So I'm quite happy with that. It means that I feel this shed is starting to come into use at fairly consistent temperature. So in order to free up more space indoors, what I've done is I've moved some of my peppers, some of my chillies out into this shed. And they have been in here all week. They seem quite happy. So I think that's going to free up more space inside. It also means that this shed is going to be more available for what I want it to do. And that is, of course, for sowing seeds and growing on our young plants. So it's moving in the right direction is what I want to get at. I'm looking at these chilli plants right now and they do look very, very happy. Anyway, on to this month's seed of the month. Now this month it is cauliflower. And cauliflowers are probably not one of the most exciting crops for most people. But for me, they are one of the hardest crops to grow. But when you get it right, they are incredibly, incredibly rewarding. But not only that, with the choice of varieties, in particular one that I'm sowing today, it opens up a lot of possibilities. It's lots of different colours of cauliflowers, shapes. It just makes it a little bit more interesting. And this month I'm actually sowing a multi-headed variety of cauliflower that I've got from Premier Seeds Direct. Back in touch with Premier Seeds Direct, of course, there will be links in the show notes. As you know, Premier Seeds Direct is my number one choice for getting our seeds. They are very, very reasonably priced and they give us some very good quantities of seeds. This multi-headed variety particularly caught my attention because it grows like a standard cauliflower. You get that large cauliflower in the centre of the plant. But around that main cauliflower, you also will get 4 or 5 smaller cauliflowers as well. Bit like broccoli, I guess you could say. But what this means is that we get more cauliflower, more food from one plant. So that's something I'm very, very excited about trying out and seeing how we get on. Now, I did mention that cauliflowers are one of those crops that many people find very, very tricky to grow. But once you understand what they need, they are incredibly rewarding. They like consistency, consistent moisture, consistent feeding, consistent temperatures. If you can give them that, then they will give you those beautiful tight heads that taste far better than anything from the supermarket. It's also one of these crops that it's worth sowing right throughout the growing season. Every month pretty much I will sow some cauliflower in order to try and give me a few cauliflowers right throughout the year. Now the thing is, when you buy a packet of cauliflower you often get quite a few seeds as it is, so it's not worth just sowing all those seeds in one go. It's well worth spacing them out. You're not going to need 1,000 cauliflowers, are you, at the end of the day? So I generally would probably do 10 seeds in each sowing. Now, whenever I sow cauliflowers, I always start them off in my root trainers. This is something I'm using more and more. Cauliflowers really hate their roots being disturbed. So I have found that starting these off in root trainers filled up with a good seed compost, with nice and firm, really does help develop that good, strong root system. Provided they get a steady temperature, they seem to get germinated quite well. Now what I do when I sow these is I fill up the root trainer with seed compost, tamp it down and make sure it's all firm. I then go along and just dib a hole about 1 centimetre deep in each plug plant and drop a single seed in each one. Now this might seem like it's a very long way of doing things. It is, in all honesty. It does take a while to sow these seeds, but it saves in the long run because there's less pricking out. I would expect germination to be about 2 to 3 weeks. Once they've germinated and once they're growing strongly, we can then move them on to summer cool and bright, pop them up once the roots are coming out the bottom, and then eventually we'll look at getting them outside once we feel they are strong enough to go outside. Now, when we're talking about varieties, I've already mentioned the cauliflower multi-headed F1, which is one that I'm really excited about trying this year. Usually, I would stick with all year round. That's one of my favourite varieties of cauliflowers. And the reason that it is one of my favourite is because, as the name suggests, it can be grown all year round. So you only really need to buy that one packet of seeds, and that will give you an entire year or two's worth of cauliflowers. However, there are some other choices. Romanesco's one of my favourite. It has this really beautiful looking cauliflower that doesn't look like cauliflower, but it's quite a vibrant green colour. You can get them in purple. They taste fairly similar to your standard cauliflowers. They just look a little bit more interesting in the garden. So really lots and lots of choices. And I come back to the fact I'm trying this multi-headed F1. What I really like about this multi-headed F1 is that it's a really clever variety. Instead of just producing one head, it's going to give you that main head followed by some multiple smaller heads. And instead of just harvesting once and pulling the plant up, we're going to get more and more crops, a longer cropping period. It's almost like sprouting broccoli, but in cauliflower form. So anyone with a garden in a smaller space, this might actually be more suitable for you. Of course, I added all links to these seeds in the show notes if you want to give it a try. Now, when we're looking at getting our seedlings out into the ground where they are to grow, we want to make sure the soil is rich with plenty of well-rotted manure or compost, whatever you might use. But like most brassicas, cauliflowers do love a firm ground. So what I like to do is just tamp down the soil before planting, making sure that it is nice and firm. Then when I plant out, what I will do is just dig out a hole, add in some garden lime. Now, garden lime is really important for any brassica. They thrive on it because it just adjusts the pH to make it much more suitable for these plants. I then pot in that plant, and once again I'll firm the soil around it, and then we'll give it a good watering and leave it to grow. Of course, giving them enough space to grow depending on the variety. But like I said earlier, one of the key things is to remember consistency, constantly keeping that soil moist. If it gets too hot, it's well worth shading out the cauliflowers in one form or another, either with shade cloth, or what many gardeners would do is actually tie the leaves over the cauliflower head to protect it from the sun. This just reduces the chance on it bolting. So something well worth looking at as well. But consistency, any check in growth can cause the heads to bolt or stay small. So keeping them consistently watered, mulching with straw, compost, anything like that will go a long way in giving you good cauliflowers. Now, how do you know when it is the right time to harvest? This is something we have been asked a bit more. So for me, it is all about that you constantly got to check your cauliflowers. Once they are firm and compact, that's the moment to cut them. Now, you've got to keep a close eye on them because you're looking for the size of a cauliflower that you would expect according to the variety. You want to squeeze them if they still feel firm. You know they are good. What you don't want is when they go over the best, past their best, because those cauliflowers then become flowers and they start to separate and they're not very good at that point. So you've got to get it just right. My advice here is to constantly keep an eye on them, constantly squeeze them when you think they're about ready, and as soon as they're ready, especially in the summer, harvest them. If you leave it a day or two, they can bolt. So definitely keep a close eye on them and you will get some good cauliflowers. Go give it a try and let me know how you get on with your own cauliflowers. And if anybody's got any tips on growing cauliflowers, then please do share them with us. Right, with that, it's time for our recipe of the week. And this week, because I've been harvesting some purple sprouting broccoli from the garden, I'm using that in a delicious recipe.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef's got with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Now this week's recipe I've already mentioned uses purple sprouting broccoli, which is just perfect for this time of year because purple sprouting broccoli at the moment is cropping beautifully in the garden. It's been months in the waiting for those deep purple florets to finally appear, and they're so full of flavour. Now this week's recipe is a roasted lemon and garlic purple sprouting broccoli with crispy chickpeas, and it's one of those dishes that really celebrates this crop. Now the recipe of course you will find on the veggrowpodcast.co.uk, but all you simply do is take a can of chickpeas and you drain those chickpeas of all the liquid. Put those chickpeas into a oven-proof dish with a bit of olive oil and then pop them in the oven for about 25 minutes. After that, we then add in the broccoli, some garlic, and we roast that for another 15 minutes until we get those lovely charred edges. And then we squeeze over a bit of lemon and serve. And that is it. It is really, really simple, but very, very tasty. Anybody could do this. Go give it a try. Let me know what you think of it. It's great as a dish on its own. It could be a side dish, something to go with couscous or quinoa. So many possibilities and so simple. Right, let's find out about our book of the month. Throughout March, I have been reading another one of Charles Dowding's book, this time titled No Dig. Now, this is probably one of his very early books, and it was at a time when I think no dig gardening was still not in the mainframe. It still wasn't very popularised. It's only really been in the last 10 years, I would say, that no dig gardening has really came to the forefront of many people's mind. I've obviously been an advocate for no dig gardening since the very beginning of this podcast. I've done no dig gardening myself since I started growing in the 90s. For me, it's just been a system that works. It just never made any sense while we dig over the soil. Now, of course, Charles Dowding is considered the guru of no-dig gardening. He is often accredited as being a pioneer of no-dig gardening. He's very, very well known. I'm sure you have heard of him. He goes with no-dig gardening like sausages and eggs go together. It's so well known. Charles Dowding, of course, being a market gardener, he's produced a lot of vegetables on his land that he then sells to market and has made a pretty successful career out of selling these vegetables, but also the talks and the books. And of course, this book, No Dig, as I said earlier, I think it's one of his very early books, but it's also very informative. Now, reading through this book, I have to admit, a lot of the information in there we have heard over and over and over again. When we talk about no-dig gardening, we're always told, it's better for the soil because there's less soil disturbance. It allows the worms and everything else to do the work for us. Less soil disturbance means less soil structure damage. Basically, everything that we hear over and over again is in this book. And I come back to the fact that this book was probably one of the early books, so I'm not surprised that there's a lot of information in there. However, what I did like about this book is it really went into a lot of detail of the benefits and the science behind no-dig gardening, but in a way that everybody could understand, or I certainly felt that it was easy to understand. Often I find when I read some of these books is it's so bogged down in details that are very difficult to comprehend that I get a little bit bored. But this was put in a way, simple English made it very, very easy to understand. Of course, it goes on not just about how no-dig gardening benefits the soil, but of course the vegetables we grow, the benefits of growing of vegetables in it, and so on. So overall, I gotta say, I thought it was a very, very good book. My only trouble I have with this book is that this information is so mainstream these days that it almost feels like it's repeating itself over and over again. And I, of course, am a no-dig gardener. I will always be a no-dig gardener, and I believe the benefits of it. But the information now is so well known that it's almost becoming like, well, why don't you know this? So, good book. Very good book, I've got to say. If you are in the market for buying one of these books, then it is well worth looking at. But if you see it in the library, I also recommend borrowing it as well. Details on this, of course, at theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk. Now, throughout March, I will be reading a book that's just been sent to me this week. It's called A Year on the River by Fiona Sims. And it's a boater's guide to growing, foraging, storing and cooking, based around life living on a narrow boat. So I'm looking forward to reading this book. It's something a little bit different that I've never really taken on board before, but I'm excited to see just what it is all about. You will hear my thoughts on this book at the end of March. Well, we are coming to the end of this week's podcast. I hope you have enjoyed it as always. If you have, then please do leave us a rate and review on your podcast provider. We have, of course, had Lynn contact us through Spotify. And Lynn says, "Hi Richard, really interested to hear what you said about straw bales. I'm definitely trying them this year. I thought I'd keep things quite simple and try with squash and cucumbers. Great podcast as always, Lynn." Now, I've got to say, straw bale gardening really does lend itself really nicely to squashes, cucumbers and so on. So starting there is a really good way to get started with straw bale gardening. It's certainly what I will be doing here at home and down on the allotment. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast and you want to help support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. Details on that at theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, which is, of course, our website. While you're on our website, theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, you can, of course, leave a comment on the bottom of a blog post, or you can leave us a voicemail if you do want to get in touch. Alternatively, you can email me, richard@theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, or you can find me on social media. Just search for the Veg Grower Podcast. We will be back again next time, so until then, please take care.